I'm sorry. I'm getting a little...
You're getting too high.
And that's it.
Oh!
So, there's gonna come a point when you forget about what happened, and you're gonna want to come back at me, and you're gonna want to wash the taste of my dick out of your mouth.
Allow me a moment to entertain you.
It's no secret that the majority of fighting game players are men. It's really always been that way, with Capcom specifically creating Street Fighter II for a predominantly male audience. From the outrageously buff dudes, the buxom women, over-the-top slow motion, the violent and dark win quotes.
Are you man enough to fight me?
Every bit of Street Fighter's identity was crafted to get men and boys to spend their quarters on those machines in the arcades. Even the music of the game was composed and performed with this audience in mind. But what if I told you that a lot of that identity, while crafted for men, wasn't actually made by men? Before I get too deep into the topic, I just want to say, once again, thanks so much for everyone's support. We're almost at 15,000 subscribers, which is mind-boggling, all things considered. If you like my content and want to support me, leaving a like or subscribing to the channel goes a long way. Also, this video took a lot of research and clip hunting to put together, so I put together a document in the description in case anyone is curious about music or where I got footage for a certain game from. Alright, without further ado, let's get back into the video. Before we get to Street Fighter, it's important to start a bit further back with earlier games developed and produced by Capcom for context. Before Street Fighter II, Capcom was known to create some of the most enticing action games in arcades, like Commando, Final Fight, or Ghosts and Goblins. Said games defined a genre of arcade entertainment between the late 80s and early 90s, garnering recognition not just in Japan, but around the entire world. What many people don't realize nowadays about arcades and games in them is that it's not just the gameplay that attracts you to them, it's the entire package. Picture this. You walk into your local arcade and you're blasted with a wave of lights, sounds, and smells that can affect all of your 5 senses at once. There's a bubbling excitement to get to that first machine, but you first have to choose which one to play. The presentation of a game is what really sucks you in for the first time. Do the controls look interesting? How about the cabinet itself? Does it draw the eye? And lastly, what sounds are coming from the speakers? That last bit is what people don't think about as much until you realize how loud arcades are and were. Every machine is clamoring for your attention over the others to the point where you can't distinguish any of it until you get closer. Well, Capcom knew this and enlisted the Capcom Sound Team to help attract players to their games, with great success. The Capcom Sound Team is, as it sounds, a group of composers tasked with writing the music for Capcom's various games at the time. The team went on to put together some of the most identifiable and influential music in gaming ever, defining the soundscape Capcom put forward to its audience. While so much of their work is recognizable decades later, the people behind these tracks weren't actually credited for these monumental pieces until after they were at their most popular. Due to the crediting philosophy of Capcom at the time, art created for their games was normally created under team names, pseudonyms, or sometimes just not at all, which created some very tricky situations for artists working under the company. For example, here's the credits for Final Fight. Character designers are credited under names like SY, Tissue, and Prince, which are obviously not real names. Music sound is listed as Yuki-chan's Papa. It's nonsense, and it's not like the real names of these people were listed elsewhere. This was it.
They call me Hell. They call me Sexy. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name.
Now, if you've seen the title of this video, you already know where I'm going with this. Capcom's sound team back in the heyday was actually mostly women. Artists like Ayako Mori and Tamayo Kawamoto joined Capcom in 1984 and worked on the games listed above, with other prominent women joining later down the line. Mori was responsible for a lot of the music in Ghosts and Goblins, and is credited as Wood. As you can see here, she wasn't credited by her name in any of the games she worked on in her few years at Capcom in the late 80s, but here's her being credited under a completely different name, Kinchaku Aya for a game called Sidearms. She was one of Capcom's first ever composers on the payroll, and yet her name wasn't easy to find on her productions until long after. I'm not saying Capcom's erasure of these women from early gaming history was intentional or targeted, as lots of men suffered from the company's policies as well, but it does shine a light on an interesting issue of what technological historians have dubbed techno-masculinity. Essentially, it's just the idea that mastery associated with technology and systems is associated with masculine ideas. In turn, this has begun to find itself applied in video games as well, with kids saying things like, "Video games are for boys," and Redditors losing their minds anytime they come across a woman in gaming.
But knowing that my opponent is this girl, I've got nothing to fear. She's going.
Men do make up a large percentage of gamers, and the numbers are rising as games become more and more accessible, so when it comes to the Capcom sound team, it would seem that there's a double-sided force against them of this techno-masculinity and poor crediting practices. Here's a great example. Ghouls and Ghosts was produced by Capcom in 1988 as an arcade sequel to Ghosts and Goblins, a notoriously difficult game. Tamayo Kawamoto, one of the early members of the sound team, composed the music for the game while taking inspiration from Ayako Mori and other team member Harumi Fujita, who worked on Bionic Commando. And yet, not only are the inspirations not listed, not only is Tamayo Kawamoto uncredited in the arcade release, there is nothing even hinting at a credit for the music of this game in the arcade release. To see any kind of credits, you need to jump through secret hoops and beat the game with a single credit, which was not only rare to do, but such practices were common in Capcom games at the time. Credits would be hidden behind secret inputs, high score screens, and various other obscure places for some reason. Now, let's compare that to a home console release of the game. If I look up Ghouls and Ghosts Commodore 64 soundtrack, it's credited to a Tim Follins. Not only is this an individual's name, it's a man's name, and there's no reference or credit to any of the songs or undertones that he took from Kawamoto's original soundtrack. Follins is also listed in the opening credits of the game, so not only is his name easy to find in the archives of history, but he also gets full credit for works that may or may not have been completely done by him. He's just listed as musician, not composer or performer, but simply musician. The major difference between these crediting approaches is that the console ports of Capcom's games were oftentimes done by localized Western teams who create new renditions of music and translations. In the West, work like this is usually credited to a single person, even if that person was just the head of a team who might not have actually had anything to do with the full creative process. That being said, the opposing crediting styles have led to the erasure of those who created the originals and been replaced by those who were influenced by what came before. Now that the context is out of the way, I want to introduce Yoko Shimomura, who is possibly the most influential fighting game composer of all time. Shimomura attended the Osaka College of Music with the intention of being a piano instructor, but because she was an avid gamer, she also submitted her applications to gaming companies recruiting at the time. She was offered a job by Capcom around 1988 to the dismay of her family, but it was something she had a passion for and would come to excel at. She wasn't at Capcom long, but her time there led to the creation of some incredible things. She worked on the soundtrack for Samurai Sword in '88 as her first assignment, and went on to compose for Final Fight in '89. But her biggest achievement that everyone still talks about today is Street Fighter II. Street Fighter II's soundtrack features over 30 songs, many of which are still being referenced today, and Shimomura composed all but 3 of them. Street Fighter II was such a breath of fresh air for fighting games, as it introduced a ton of unique characters, flashy colorful stages, and last but not least, individual character themes meant to evoke emotions and familiarity in the players using them.
Sonic booms and flash kicks are his style, but when you think of Guile, remember his lifelong vow: never go out with fucking eyebrows.
She's such a big reason for Street Fighter II being the success that it was and is today. And yet, once again, you can probably tell where this is headed. She wasn't credited for any of it properly until well after the game's most popular moments. At the time, Capcom had an in-house band called Alf Lyla, which was composed of members of the sound team, but they all went by pseudonyms in the band and were credited as such in Street Fighter II's credit sequence. Shimomura went by Shimo P, a name that can be found in the credits of a lot of Capcom games from the 80s, but in Street Fighter II, the names and photos only appeared if you completed the game with one credit. At the time, those in the West had no idea Shimomura was a woman, possibly due to the unfamiliarity with Japanese names, but definitely not helped by the false name and pixelated picture in the credits.
Enhance. Enhance. Enhance.
Just print the damn thing!
But the other side of that problem is that she leaned very heavily into gender-coded themes for her works in Street Fighter. For example, Ken's theme in Street Fighter II is heavily inspired by the hyper-masculine track found in Hollywood films like Top Gun. As a game made for a specific type of man, this made sense, but definitely displaced someone like Shimomura from the source, even though she was also a gamer and the literal creator of a video game-wide cultural theme. References to the Street Fighter II soundtrack can be found all over hip-hop, adding to the masculine macho feel, like here.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Funny Bunny Hour, where we're gonna play nothing but funny music.
But interestingly enough, the women of hip-hop have also taken a liking to it as well.
When I come for your hairdo, got the moves like I'm Ryu, yellow diamonds, Pikachu. When I switch my hair to blonde, I'm finna turn up like I rock rough and stuff with my afro puffs.
Rock on with your baby.
Now I'm hitting MCs like, oh, you get
Andy Prince on. Ayo, I been off. Laura Bencroft. Play say Chung-Li. Drop the Benz off.
Speaking of Chun-Li, she happens to be Shinomura's favorite character, likely for more reasons than just what's on the surface. Chun-Li was the only female character in the original Street Fighter II, and that forced the character to carry a lot on her back. While being the only woman in the game, that came with a sort of fetishized sexualization around her powerful legs.
Hello, ma'am. Usually I assault people who even kind of look at me weird, but your legs make my brain go awooga. Would you like to
But she was indeed powerful. In canon, Chun was the strongest woman in the world, and in gameplay, she was easy to pick up and win with, making her a popular pick among men and women. And that's where the duality of women in fighting games makes itself apparent. The conformity of a female character to fit in with an all-male cast and hyper-masculine space definitely resonated with Shimomura, who was a woman gamer working in Capcom during part of its golden age. But what she found wasn't that the space couldn't work for women. In fact, she felt welcome with the sound team as its most successful members were women themselves. As part of the sound team, her work is one of the first elements of Street Fighter that players encounter. It's quite literally at the forefront of the arcade experience.
My favorite probably was Blanca's theme.
And yet, her name was pushed so far back, you couldn't even find it if you wanted to at the time. Regardless, Shimomura went on to work with Square and has composed some of the hardest hitting and memorable pieces in gaming for games like Kingdom Hearts and the Final Fantasy series. Despite not being credited for a long time, she has found massive success and paved the way for a lot of women in gaming behind her. I heard about Shinomura's story pretty randomly one day, and it really shook me that she went so long without proper recognition. She's responsible for so much of the identity of modern fighting games, and yet her name wasn't associated with her work for years after she'd done it. Nevertheless, fighting games plaster women all over their marketing, attracting people to play their waifus or characters with certain assets that overshadow others. Behind the scenes, it was easy to erase women from fighting game history, while pushing the shallow caricatures of women to the forefront of what we were all seeing. But hey, that's really changed nowadays.
If you don't know who Sherry Jennings is, you're just not paying attention to the FGC, is my opinion.
Yeah, it's still working really.
I'm not telling this story to say that things are horrible for women in gaming, but rather that so much progress actually has been made. Women are behind the games we play. They create the identity of our community that we strive to uphold, and they're the backbone of so many fantastic moments in the FGC. This is just my attempt at recognizing that and hoping to help others do the same. That's all I've got for now. I hope you enjoyed. See you in the next one.
Finally, and last but not least, I'd like to thank the wonderful Miss Yoko Shimomura.